My name is Juliana Carter, 27 years old, and I never truly felt I belonged to the family I grew up in. Outsiders might think we were a typical American household. Stable parents, 2 daughters, a suburban home with a white picket fence. But inside, the truth was very different. I was always treated as an extra, a shadow living under the same roof, existing only to be compared, to serve needs I was never asked about. That day in the lobby of the hospital in Denver, everything exploded. My mother, Clara, stood in the middle of the crowd, her hands trembling but her eyes blazing. In her hands were my medical records, papers that should have stayed locked away in the doctor's cabinet. She raised them high and then tore them apart in front of everyone. The sharp sound of paper ripping drew the stares of nurses, patients, and visitors. "You're letting your sister die, Juliana," her voice rang out like an indictment. "Ungrateful, selfish girl, you think you have the right to refuse?" I froze. For a moment, I felt like I was on stage in a play my mother was directing. People looked at me not with sympathy but with judgment. Some women shook their heads. A young father held his child closer, while the receptionist pretended to focus on the keyboard to avoid my gaze. My father, Richard, stepped forward from behind, his tall frame casting a shadow on the floor. He didn't shout, didn't raise a hand. Just one short, cold sentence: "You really are a selfish mistake." It wasn't the first time I'd heard it. But in the suffocating air of that hospital lobby, his words were like a final verdict, harsh and merciless. It all started when my sister, Melissa, 29, was diagnosed with end-stage liver disease. The only option to prolong her life was a transplant. And I, the second child, instantly became the donor candidate in my parents' eyes. No discussion, no choice. Only pressure, orders, and accusations. What stung the most was that Melissa was the very person who tormented me all through childhood. When I cried from being bullied, she sneered and called me weak. When I achieved something at school, Melissa spread rumors that I was adopted from somewhere. I never confirmed it, but her words etched themselves deep into me. And now both my parents wanted me to give up part of my body to save the one who crushed my childhood. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice but sharpening her tone like a blade. "I didn't raise you so you could turn your back on this family. You're your sister. You owe this house." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms until it hurt. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but my throat closed up. In my mind, only one thought echoed: why is everything I do never enough? Shredded medical papers scattered at my feet like evidence in an invisible trial. People whispered, shook their heads. No one stood on my side. I bent down, picking up a few torn pages. Not out of guilt. I needed them. I needed proof. Something that couldn't be twisted by my mother's dramatic words. She leaned close, whispering, "You'll live to regret this. One day when Melissa is gone, you'll remember today and you'll hate yourself forever." I lifted my head, staring straight into her eyes, unblinking. Funny. I've remembered countless moments in my life, but none of them ever looked like a family. She froze for a beat, then screamed louder, her voice echoing down the hall. "You're letting your sister die." The words bounced off the walls, dragged out deliberately to paint me as a villain before everyone. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I stood still like a statue, letting the performance play on. Through the glass of the hospital room, I saw Melissa lying in bed. Her face pale from medication, but her eyes were the same as always, cold, disdainful. And when they met mine, her lips curved into a faint smile. Not gratitude, not hope, just the smile of someone who knew she still held control. Later, I sat quietly on a bench in the hospital hallway, the torn papers still in my bag. The faint antiseptic smell carried me back to childhood, to the beginning of all the injustices I swallowed in silence. I remembered my 13th birthday. While classmates had big parties, I got a small cake hastily bought from a discount shop. That afternoon, my parents took Melissa to the mall and handed her a delicate gold necklace. They gave me a $10 gift card with the words, "Don't forget, Juliana, we don't have to provide for you like we do a real daughter." I forced a smile, pretending not to care, but that sentence burned into me like ink on skin. At 16, I studied hard for a statewide scholarship. The night before submission, my application vanished. I searched everywhere only to find it soaked with coffee in the trash. Melissa sat smirking on the couch. "Oops, I must have spilled it. Who cares about your silly contest anyway?" I handed in the wrinkled, Ruined application too late. The scholarship slipped away and my parents only shook their heads. Be grateful we still raise you. I never understood why they kept repeating it. Not until I was 21. During a heated argument, Clara finally blurted it out. You need to remember, Juliana, you're not our blood. The room collapsed around me. Melissa stood there, arms folded, eyes gleaming with satisfaction as she watched me break. From that moment, I knew all those "we don't have to raise you" lines weren't just insults. They were the truth. And yet, ironically, the moment I discovered I was adopted, I became the perfect tool for my family to control. I was always tied to the so-called debt of gratitude they created. They raised me, so I had to pay the price in every way, even with my own body. When Melissa was admitted to the hospital 3 months ago, I secretly went for a liver donor screening test. I wanted to know the truth before being forced into anything. The results came back to my personal email. Not compatible. Just a short line, but enough for me to breathe easier. At least I had proof that I couldn't be turned into an unwilling donor. But that hope was quickly crushed. 2 weeks later, my mother suddenly showed up at my apartment holding a printed file. In it, the results were completely different. I was listed as fully compatible. I remember trembling when I saw the faint seal. A chill ran down my spine. What had they done to the real results? I still recall that evening, Richard standing in the middle of the living room, his voice clipped and sharp with every word. We gave you a roof, food, clothing. Now it's time to give back. Melissa is your sister and you will save her. I wanted to scream that I owed them nothing, that love is not a transaction. But his cold eyes trapped the words in my throat. I turned to the only person I could trust. Elena, my best friend from college, now working in law. I forwarded her the original results from my email. Elena stared at the screen for a long moment before saying, Juliana, this is clear evidence. If they altered the results in the hospital records, it means they deliberately falsified them to force you. You need to be careful. That warning haunted me for many nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Melissa's satisfied gaze, Clara's dramatic wailing, and Richard's stone face. They didn't want to save Melissa through medicine. They wanted to prove I was still under their control. I gripped my phone tighter, staring at the email with the real results. The words "not compatible" glowed like a fragile escape. I had kept silent, waiting for the right moment to turn the game around. But the more I thought about it, the more terrifying it became. If my mother had once ripped apart my medical records right in the hospital lobby, what was stopping her from hiding the real results now? When I returned to the hospital that morning, I saw on the doctor's desk a file with my name. Juliana Carter, compatible liver donor for Melissa Carter. I froze. That page was proof someone had rewritten the truth. My head spun, but one thought blazed through. If I don't protect myself, no one else will. I decided I had to act. Bring the truth to light before my family turned me into a living sacrifice on their terms. I sat in a small cafe near the hospital, the warm yellow light falling across the wooden table. My laptop screen glared back with the familiar words. Not compatible, not suitable for liver donation. I read them over and over, burning them into my memory. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I opened my email, clicked compose, and typed in Elena Johnson's address, the friend and lawyer I trusted completely. Subject: reconfirming non-compatibility. I attached the original PDF results, adding a note. Elena, keep this for me. This will be the only proof when they start twisting the truth. Then I pressed send. A puff of steam rose from my cappuccino, but inside I felt ice cold. I had just sent away the insurance policy for my life. That afternoon, I returned to the hospital and went straight to the attending doctor's office. Peterson, in his 50s, stern face but gentle eyes, hesitated as he opened a file on his screen. He looked at me for a long moment, then spoke slowly. Juliana, something isn't right. The system shows you've never taken a test before. But I can see traces that the data was altered. My throat tightened. I whispered, then, who has the authority to change the records? He paused, sighing. Typically, a legal guardian or someone with medical power of attorney. In the file, your mother, Clara Carter, is listed as holding that authority. I went rigid. Medical power of attorney? I had never signed any such papers. Doctor, I clutched the strap of my bag, my voice shaking but steady. May I see the original copy? A few minutes later, he handed me a photocopy. At the bottom, under medical power of attorney, was a scrawled signature, Juliana Carter. But it was not my signature. I stared at the forged lines, my hands trembling with rage. My blood boiled, but my voice sank into an icy calm. This is a forgery. Peterson nodded slowly. I believe so too. This signature is nothing like the one on your admission forms. Juliana, you need to protect yourself. I'll provide you with an official stamped copy. I bowed my head, hiding the fire in my eyes. Thank you, doctor. This is exactly what I needed. As I left his office, the long hospital hallway felt heavier than ever. And I knew my parents wouldn't give up. Sure enough, before I even reached the elevator, I saw them. Clara, her eyes red with fake tears, and Richard, arms crossed, standing like he was presiding over a trial. Juliana, it's time, my mother said, holding out a stack of fresh papers. Sign here, confirm the liver donation. As a daughter, you should know how to do the right thing. I didn't move closer, only stood a few feet away, my voice firm. No. I won't sign. Richard frowned, every muscle in his face twitching. You think you can turn your back on this family? I pulled the photocopy of the forged power of attorney from my bag, raising it for them to see. You forged my signature. This is proof. If you keep forcing me, I'll take you straight to court for fraud and coercion. Clara staggered a step, her face flickering before she quickly put on a sorrowful mask. Juliana, you're misunderstanding. We just want to save Melissa. Sweetheart, you're her last hope. I gave a bitter laugh. Hope? Or just a pawn? I know the real test results. I was never compatible. You knew that all along but still hid it. This isn't about saving someone, it's about control. Richard stepped closer, his voice low like a threat. Don't be foolish, Juliana. If you make this bigger, you'll regret it. I stepped back half a pace, but my gaze never wavered. No, the ones who'll regret it will be you. I already sent the real results and the forged papers to my lawyer. If anything happens to me, both of you will face court. Silence hung heavy for a few seconds. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my chest. Clara hissed through her teeth, "You're going to destroy this family." I answered, each word cutting like a blade. Family? A real family wouldn't turn their child into a tool. A real family wouldn't forge a signature to steal part of my body. If this is what you call family, then I don't need it. A young nurse walked by, her eyes briefly meeting ours, pausing for a second at the tension. I seized the chance, glaring at my parents. Touch me again and I'll call the police right here. Richard clenched his fists, and Clara clutched the unsigned documents with shaking hands. I turned and walked away, leaving behind my mother's fake sobs and my father's heavy silence. But this time I was no longer the cornered child. I had proof. And I had my own voice. That evening I stood outside hospital room 417, where my sister, Melissa Carter, was being treated. White light spilled out, the smell of medicine and disinfectant seeping into the hallway. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Melissa lifted her head from the medical journal she was only pretending to read. Her face was pale from illness, but her eyes still gleamed with that familiar arrogance. Seeing me, her lips curled into a thin smile. So you finally came, Juliana? Or were you planning to let your sister die to ease your burden? I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. You know very well I can't donate my liver to you. I already have the test results. You knew that too, didn't you? Melissa didn't blink. The smile on her lips slowly hardened into a sharp stare. Then, as if there was no point hiding, she gave a small nod. Yes, I knew. I've known for months. In that moment, my heart felt like it was being crushed. Her answer confirmed every suspicion I had carried. I gave a bitter smile, pulled a metal chair, and sat across from her bed. From my bag, I took out a stack of documents, the papers clattering as I set them on the bedside table. These are the real test results, with the hospital's official seal. This is a copy of the forged power of attorney Mom put into the file. And these are the emails I kept, proving you knew I wasn't compatible but let everything continue. Melissa glanced at the papers like they were a joke. He shrugged. So what? In the end, you're still here, still letting them pull the strings. I don't need to say anything else. As long as I stay quiet, everything happens the way I want. Her tone was calm, even smug. The words stabbed me like needles. I gripped the edge of the table, my voice trembling but determined. You let them destroy me, let them build a story painting me as selfish. You knew I wasn't a match, but you sat back and let mom and dad manipulate because it made you feel like the center. Melissa turned to the window, city lights casting sharp shadows on her gaunt cheekbones. A heavy silence lingered. Then she sighed, not out of regret but with cold certainty. Juliana, you were born in this house to be a replacement. I've always been the center. That's the unspoken law. You think a few papers will change that? I shot to my feet, my voice cutting clear. No, you're wrong. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. You haven't won, you're just delaying the day it comes out. Melissa turned back to me, her eyes flashing with irritation. I could see cracks forming in her long-held confidence. I gathered the documents, sliding them back into my bag. As my hand touched the zipper, Melissa spoke again, her voice low but razor-sharp. Fine, you have proof. But do you really think the public will believe you, the abandoned adopted child, over the Carter family? Mom and Dad will rewrite the story and I just have to lie here and wait for pity. You will always be the outsider. I looked straight at her for the first time without fear, no longer craving recognition. I spoke slowly and clearly. No. I am no longer the outsider. You can perform for the cameras, our parents can put on a show for the public. But I have real proof. And this time I will not stay silent. Melissa's hand tightened on the blanket, her eyes flashing with anger though her lips curled into a mocking smile. Juliana, you really have changed. I didn't respond. I turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind me. Each step down the hospital hallway echoed strong and certain. I knew the battle wasn't over. But this time I had a weapon, the truth. That morning, the main hall of the hospital in Denver was decorated as if for a celebration of gratitude. A banner hung high with the words, "The strength of community, honoring the anonymous donor." Rows of chairs neatly arranged, camera lenses gleaming. I stood quietly at the far end of the corridor, watching like an unwilling spectator. At the podium, my mother, Clara, appeared in a navy blazer, her makeup flawless, her voice theatrical. Thanks to the sacrifice of an anonymous donor and the devoted care of our medical team, our daughter Melissa has a chance to live. My father, Richard, stood beside her, his face solemn, chiming in, "Our family has faced a great trial, but today proves the power of love and kinship." Scattered applause followed. Behind them, the large screen showed Melissa in her hospital bed, lightly made up, her faint smile radiating triumph. I gripped the strap of my bag, fury chilling my veins. Anonymous donor? They were writing me out of the story as if I had never existed. I knew this was the moment I had to step into the light. As Clara bowed her head in gratitude, I walked straight down the aisle. Whispers erupted. Cameras swiveled toward me. I reached the podium and slammed my file down on the wood. "Excuse me for interrupting," I said, my voice booming through the still live microphone. "My name is Juliana Carter. And the truth is being hidden." The hall erupted in shock. Clara froze pale. Richard frowned, stepping forward as if to stop me, but the cameras had already caught everything. I opened the file, holding up the first document. "This is my liver donor test result, confirmed by the hospital. It states clearly, I am not compatible with Melissa." A wave of murmurs swept the room. I laid down the second paper. "This is a photocopy of a forged medical power of attorney, bearing a signature that is not mine. Someone deliberately used it to force me to consent." Flashes popped, reporters rushed forward. I pulled out my phone, opening a text thread. "This proves Melissa knew I wasn't a match, yet she stayed silent while our parents manipulated. This isn't about saving a life, it's about control." My voice rang steady, unwavering. I took a deep breath and declared, "I don't want revenge. I only want to end the silence. I will not let them rewrite this story with lies ever again." At that moment, the entire room fell silent. No applause, no words of support. Only the glare of cameras and the truth laid bare. Clara trembled, clutching the podium. She tried to speak. "Juliana, you're making this up." But before she could finish, her knees buckled. Her face drained, eyes darting wildly. Then, before hundreds of witnesses, Clara collapsed onto the polished floor. Gasps and shouts filled the air as nurses rushed to her side. Richard lurched forward, but the authority in his eyes was gone, replaced with emptiness. Cameras turned toward Melissa. On the big screen she sat frozen, lips pressed tight, eyes unfocused. I didn't move closer, nor did I walk away. I stood still, letting everyone see the truth. The once perfect facade of a family crumbling in public view. From below, a reporter shouted, "Juliana, what do you want from this? Justice? Or revenge?" I turned, looking directly into the camera, and answered firmly, "No. I just want to never have to explain myself to them again. I just want to live with the truth." In that moment, I felt the weight of silence lift. No longer a silence of control, but a space for truth to be heard. 2 days after the chaotic press conference, the story spread across every newspaper and local TV channel. Headlines scrolled across the screens: Carter family accused of forging medical records. Adopted daughter exposes abuse and forced organ donation. Everywhere I went, whispers followed. At the cafe near my apartment, two middle-aged men were talking. "Did you hear about the Carter family?" They staged that whole story about an anonymous donor, and it turned out to be fake. The man took a sip of his coffee, shaking his head. "I'm a father myself, and I can't imagine treating a daughter that way." The Denver hospital immediately launched an internal investigation. I was asked to work with the ethics board and the legal department. In a bright meeting room, Dr. Peterson placed a thick file in front of me. He looked me straight in the eye, his voice calm but clear. "Juliana, we reviewed all the tests. Your liver was never a viable option for Melissa's surgery. Not only were you incompatible, but your blood vessel structure wouldn't allow for a safe transplant. Even if you had agreed, the surgery could never have happened." I froze, then let out a hollow laugh. So all the pressure, the tears, the accusations that I was selfish were meaningless from the start. "So, they knew from the beginning?" I asked. The doctor nodded slowly. "The results were sent to your mother, Clara, as the contact person. She received the notification 6 months ago." A chill ran down my spine. Clara hadn't just staged a drama. She had known the truth all along and still insisted on turning me into a sacrifice. The investigation didn't stop there. The board ordered DNA testing to verify all medical records in the family file. I sat in the sample room, my chest heavy as stone, the needle pricking my skin without pain. The results came back a week later. This time I wasn't alone. Elena, my best friend and lawyer, sat beside me, her hand lightly on my arm in reassurance. Peterson opened the sealed envelope and pulled out 3 sheets. He read slowly, each word carved into the air. "The results show that Juliana Carter has no biological relation to Melissa Carter, nor to Richard and Clara Carter." The room fell silent. I heard Elena's pen drop to the table. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. The final pieces of the puzzle had clicked. I was not their child. I was not a sister. I was in insurance policy. Elena whispered, "Oh my God. Juliana, this explains everything. The years of unfair treatment, the constant reminders, we don't have to raise you, the looks of contempt when I tried to achieve something, all of it wasn't imagined. They had raised me only so one day they could use my body as a lifeline for Melissa." I opened my eyes, looking straight at the doctor. "So that means they kept me only for this moment?" He didn't answer directly, only said softly, "The truth is clear now. What matters is that you have the right to decide for yourself." On the way home, the chilly April wind swept through the streets, making me pull my coat tighter. I remembered the countless times I'd asked myself, why am I always the unwanted one? Now the answer was here, painful but undeniable. I had never been their daughter. I was only a backup plan, raised out of obligation, not love. That night, I opened my laptop and stared at the saved case file. I wrote in my journal, "They called me a mistake. But the truth shows the real mistake was not my existence. It was how they turned family into a transaction." My phone rang. A local newspaper wanted an interview. I declined. I didn't need more flashbulbs, more invasive questions. I just needed the truth to be acknowledged. As night fell, I sat by my apartment window, staring at the city lights in the distance. For the first time in years, my chest felt lighter. I was no longer Juliana, the selfish daughter. I was Juliana, the survivor of manipulation, the keeper of truth. And this time the truth could not be torn apart. 1 month after the chaotic press conference, I walked into the Denver courthouse with another file. But this time, not to present evidence against my adoptive parents. I came to file for a legal name change. When the clerk called my name, I stood, my voice firm. Do I want to keep Carter as a scar or live with the name I chose for myself? The answer had been clear for a long time. I signed the final document, choosing the name that felt truly mine, Juliana Hale. No more Carter, no more ties to the years of control. The new name wasn't a beginning from nothing. It was my way of declaring, I exist for myself. Leaving the courthouse, the early summer sun bathed the street in warmth and calm. I lifted my head, feeling like I could finally breathe freely. A few days later, Melissa texted me. For the first time, not with accusations or mockery. Just a short line, "Can I see you once?" No one else, just the two of us. I hesitated, then agreed. We met in the garden behind the hospital where birch trees rustled in the wind. Melissa sat on a stone bench, thin in a gray hoodie. Her face bare of makeup, only her tired eyes remained. When she saw me, she didn't give the usual smirk, only let out a long sigh. Juliana, all this time I thought I had the right to let our parents do whatever they wanted. I didn't stop them because I benefited from the silence. I knew you weren't compatible, but I still let the script play out, because at least I was still the center. I sat down, keeping just enough distance. You don't need to explain. I understand now. But understanding doesn't mean forgiveness. Melissa nodded, her shoulders sinking as if releasing a burden. I never expected you to forgive me. I just want you to know, for the first time I feel like I lost. I looked straight at her, my voice firm. You didn't lose to me. You lost to the truth. And the truth doesn't belong to anyone. A long silence. Then I stood up and turned away. This time I carried no weight with me. I didn't need revenge nor an apology. I just needed to let go, to move forward. One afternoon, I received an envelope with no sender's name. The postmark was from Arizona. I tore it open. Inside was a neatly handwritten note. Dear Juliana, I'm 17. I'm also adopted, and many times I felt like nothing but a burden. I read your story in the paper. I don't know if I would have the courage to say no if I were in your place. But because of you, I know I have a choice. I have a voice. Thank you for giving me hope. No signature, only one last line. From someone who once thought she was alone. I read the letter again and again, my eyes blurring not from sadness, but from emotion. I folded it carefully, placing it in my desk drawer where I kept my most treasured keepsakes. Not in the evidence folder, but in the memories box. Because this letter was no longer proof of pain. It was the sign of a new beginning, a peaceful one. That night, I sat on my apartment balcony, the city of Denver sparkling with lights. A warm cup of tea in my hand, the breeze brushing through my hair. I smiled to myself. I once thought happiness came from family's recognition. But now I know happiness is simply when you're no longer defined by lies. My name is Juliana Hale. I am no longer a backup pawn. I am myself. And for the first time in my life, that is enough. From Juliana's story, we see a bitter truth. Not every family truly holds the meaning of kinship. Sometimes behind the titles of parent or sibling lies exploitation, a trap of silence and control. But Juliana chose to stand, to speak for herself. It wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming the right to live authentically, the right to decide for herself. In real life, we too can learn from her. Truth may hurt, but only truth can free us from invisible chains. What do you think about Juliana's choice and the way she broke free from her family's control? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more dramatic and meaningful real-life stories about family.